Alive.
Hi everyone, I'm Flo Bartell, and I'm here at the invitation of Art Central Art Supply and Gallery. We're celebrating their 10th anniversary, and so for several weeks they'll be having demos every day. Since we can't celebrate live this year, then we're doing it this way. So I appreciate the offer, and I'm also, I have to say that this store has just been a fabulous thing for me. I paint with a medium that not too many people are familiar with, and the fact that they stock all of my supplies is just a wonderful thing. Before they came here 10 years ago, it was difficult to get all the supplies that I needed, and everything had to be online, and so I have appreciated the support that they've given us over the years. So the first thing I want to talk about is what this medium is and a little bit about the history. I'm painting with Encaustic, and Encaustic is a blend of beeswax. This, of course, is how it looks in the honeycomb, and then without any processing, it looks like this. That's the natural color. It can be anywhere from a little darker to this to a little lighter than this. But then this was not always the case. I've been painting with Encaustic for about 14 years, and when I began, I just had to buy pieces like this from beekeepers or wherever I could find it. Now they make it in a granulated form like this, which makes it way easier for me to work with. So this is natural beeswax. This has been filtered so that it's light, and I don't mind using the dark. It's just that many people like the light. It doesn't contaminate your color and doesn't change the color. But if you're painting with dark colors, it's okay. So this is a blend. Encaustic is a blend of beeswax and damar resin, which is tree sap. And make sure that we're not talking about damar varnish. This is damar resin. So it's just tree sap, has no solvents in it. So the process is basically the beeswax combined with the resin, and then if you want color, you add raw pigment. You can prepare all of that yourself, but fortunately there are those who make it for us in blocks like this, and so this would be a combination of these three things. So we're not sure exactly what year, but we know that in the 1st century BC, there's evidence of people using Encaustic, and then in the between the 1st and 5th century AD, we know that the ancient Greeks used Encaustic to seal their ships because it's waterproof, it seals, and it's preservative. From there, Greek painters began to paint. Well, I assume Greek shipbuilders began to decorate their ships. And then from there, Greek painters began to paint with Encaustic, mostly portraits. When Greek travelers moved to Egypt and settled there, they continued their practice of painting with Encaustic. And they also adopted the habit of mummifying bodies after their family members died. And they decorated mummy cases with Encaustic portraits. And examples of those ancient portraits still survive. A cache of those portraits were found in Fayum, which is part of Egypt. And so the portraits are now referred to as the Fayum portraits, even though not all of them were found there. I've been very fortunate to see some of those, but this is the style. And you can see that they, at least to me, they look a little bit Greek, and that is because of the Greek influence. They had to use small tools and a stylus to get the small details that you see in these pictures. Not many people use Encaustic in that way now, although some do. Through the years, because Encaustic needs to be fused, we paint on a layer of wax and then we fuse it and we paint on a layer of wax and fuse it. In the early days, brazers and other forms of other difficult to use heat tools were used to fuse the wax. And so once tempera and other more convenient forms of painting were developed, then encaustic sort of was not something that many people did because it was just so inconvenient. And but now with all the heat tools that we have, you know, I'm using an electric griddle today, heat guns. At home I use a torch like this. We don't use one here in the store because of insurance reasons. So what bad things could happen. So we'll be using the heat gun today. But it was a difficult thing to do. And so, but now, just in the last 25 years, there's been a resurgence because we have griddles, we have convenient heat tools. It's still, you know, some can still consider it a complicated process, but not like it would have been in the past. A little bit more about what is available now. I buy the Damar resin like this, and I buy the granulated beeswax like this to make my medium. And the encaustic medium is simply a combination of these two. And I pour it, I cook it in an electric skillet, and then I pour it into silicone muffin cups, and I get just little pucks of medium like this that I then can use in my pans. If you don't want to go through that process, now we have available, it's a larger granules than that, little pellets of wax, and this is the encaustic medium. It's just a combination of these two, and they're readily available in art stores and online now. For many years, encaustic paint was not available commercially. For a little while, the only place that was carrying it was a small store in New York. When that store was closing, Richard Firmes bought the supplies that they had left and began making his own paint. And he is now the founder and owner of RNF Paints. And I use almost exclusively RNF paints, and those are the ones that we carry here at Art Central. I was fortunate to visit their company in New York in the summer of 2019. It was interesting to see how they mill the paints, and you can understand why it's such a smooth paint and why I enjoy using it so much. The paint now comes in 3 sizes. A smaller little block like this, and then the medium one, and then the large one. Most people start with the small ones and graduate, and I paint such large paintings that I use this a lot. Those are sort of the basics, and then there are just so many more things that I can use with encaustic to embellish my paintings. RNF also makes oil pigment sticks that are carried here at the store, and I like to use those. And you know, before these were as available, I used a lot of other things, but now these are just so wonderful that I enjoy using them to add any color that I want to my paintings. If you would like a good resource for all things encaustic, this is the book I suggest people buy first. When I first began, there were no books. There were 1 or 2 that had been published, but not really readily available. And then when this one came out from Lissa Rankin, I found that it just had really good basic information, has a good review of the history, good information about the materials that you need, and also some of the art that people have done with encaustic. It's a good book to start with if you're starting from scratch. So, encaustic needs, the rules are, encaustic needs to be on a stable substrate, so wood is ideal. It needs to be porous. We can break those rules sometimes, but to begin with, I think it's a good idea to start with wood. I like to demo with these small 10 by 10 panels. And I will tell you that as I work today, I'm not going to think about the outcome. I mostly want to show you the process. And then, as I often do, I will probably take this home and work on it some more. And then it'll probably pop up here in the gallery later on. So I want to just touch on safety first, and then I'll show you what I do. So the most important things to remember with safety is to ventilate. The fumes are not particularly harmful, but they are fumes. And so you don't want to be breathing them in all the time. We're pretty well ventilated here in the store. There are several ways to accomplish that at home if you're setting up an encaustic workplace. One is if you have a really good cross current, that might suffice. I used to live in an upstairs, in a house where my studio was upstairs, and I was very close to the ocean, so I could open 2 windows, and it was just, the air was whooshing through. So I felt like that was enough. Right now, I'm a little farther away from the ocean, and I don't have quite that same breeze, and so I have a vent set up that's right over my griddle, and so just to help me so that I never forget, when I turn the lights on in my studio, the vent comes on and it exhausts the fumes from there. I still like to open a window to get a little bit of fresh air through. So number 1 is ventilation. I think it's wise to wear gloves. And also, if you use a torch, you need to be sure that you're working on a heat-proof surface. I use a big oil drip pan at home. Today we're not using anything flammable, so we just have rosin paper. Also at home, I cover my workspace with rosin paper before I put the oil drip pan on it. I also put this on my floor because I spent the first few years scraping wax off my floor. And so now I don't have to do that. I put the rosin paper down, and then in about 3 months I remove it and then put a new layer down, and then it's fine. So just to review a little bit, we use a medium made from these 2, and that's the encaustic medium. And then we also use the paint, which is a combination of these 3, and that's what I have in these pans. If I want to set up a pan of paint, I can take a block like this and put not too much color in there, because you don't really need a whole lot. Kind of depends on what you're doing and how dense or how opaque you want your paint. I'm going to do it just not too much in there today. I'm not even sure if I'm going to use that color. So this is the medium. I'm going to put at least twice as much as there is paint. So this brush is, the brand is Mandalay. It's a natural bristle brush, which is really important, because if you're going to heat it, obviously you don't want a synthetic one that will melt. The reason why I like this particular brush is because it has this silicone ferrule. If it's a metal ferrule, like some of the ones that we use here in the store for classes, have a metal ferrule, but after a while the brushes will fall out, the bristles will fall out. The other thing is, if I'm working large and if I have one with a metal ferrule and turn it up this way, the wax leaks down through, and I don't like that. And so this is my preferred brush, pretty widely available now, I think. They can be cleaned. I don't often clean mine because I use a different brush for each color. And so I can just leave it in the pans, just like this. When I finish today, I can turn off the griddle and just leave the brushes in there if I want to. I usually pull them out and wipe them off and put them like that at home, generally. So the wax melts at about 156. The best painting temperature to me is about 200. You don't want your griddle higher than 200. We talked about toxicity a few minutes ago, and if your paint is on the griddle and it's higher than 200, then it gets smoky, and I don't think that's good for us. So never have it higher than 200. I use at home and here a Presto griddle. There are pallets available, but I prefer the Presto griddle. It's easy to control. It's easy to watch the temperature. It's easy to change the temperature. And if you notice, I have a little thermometer here. I check my pallet, if we want to call it a pallet now, every now and then to make sure that it's still, that my setting that I have found to be 200, that it's still there, because as they get old, they get more temperamental and they can wear out, and so you need to make sure that you're not going over 200. There's some people that say to put their temperatures at 180. I prefer 200, it's a little bit more molten. If I wanted to paint with the wax at a little bit cooler temperature to get more texture, I can do that. I can turn down the palette just a little bit.
We have a question.
Yes.
They say, what is RNF?
RNF is the paint company, the manufacturer that makes this paint.
Do a little close up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're located in Kingston, New York.
Thank you. Go on.
There are two major encaustic paint manufacturers. One is RNF, and the other is Encausticos. And by the way, the word encaustic comes from the Greek word to burn in. The Greek word is encausticos, and so we say the word as encaustic, and then the other manufacturer is called Encausticos. They have wonderful paint too. This is the one that I am more comfortable with. It's the one I began using, and I use a lot of paint, and I love the opacity of some of the colors that that RNF makes. So here's the one that I blended just a few minutes ago, and I could probably add a little bit more medium to that one to make it just right. You know, after you've painted with it for a little while, you'll feel it when you start with the brush, and you'll know exactly how you want it to be. All right, so the very first step, now some people warm their board just like this. I was self-taught and didn't have the advantage of a workshop for many years, and so I was winging it and finding my own way, and I never thought to heat my board, and so I generally don't, because it's the way I started. But if I wanted to a very, very smooth application, then I would want to heat it. I didn't heat it long enough then for it to make a difference. I like to brush it on smoothly. That may not matter, especially depending on what you're doing, but I like to brush on a thin coat. And I'm overlapping a little bit. If I miss a spot on the first layer, that's probably not too bad, because I'm going to come back with another layer, at least one more layer. You know, I first, I saw the first piece of encaustic that I knew of in the summer of 2003, and I said, oh my gosh, what is that? And somebody said it was wax. Well, what kind of wax? And so that took me on a journey of several years, and it wasn't until 2006 that I really found out what it was and where to get the supplies and what to do. I had practiced a little bit with beeswax, because I did find out it was beeswax. and I had worked with it for a while before I knew to add the resin or before I knew how to get the paint. So I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and so I learned from those, and I think that's been a good thing. It was a good way to learn what not to do. So I'm fusing lightly, and I know the camera probably can't pick this up, but I fuse just until it begins to have a little shine. It's beginning to look a little bit wet again. Now sometimes that's not what I want to do. Sometimes, not in the first layers, but sometimes later, I want to really make the wax move around, and then I can fuse it even more. But for now, since we're just beginning, we're just going to fuse it lightly. I spent my first several years working with Encaustic, trying to see how smooth I could get it. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I've tried to see how much texture I can get. It's been a fun journey. So even though Encaustic was not widely used over the last good number of centuries, there were some famous people who used it. Diego Rivera used Encaustic, and Jasper Johns is another very famous Encaustic artist. I had seen his pieces in museums, his flags and targets, but I had no idea they were wax. I just saw collage. I had no idea it was wax, but they were. If I want this to be a little smoother than it is now, I could fuse it a little bit more, make it really shiny. Or even soupy, if I decided to do that, if that's what I wanted to do. But you will notice how quickly I put on that second coat. A huge advantage of Encaustic is that it dries really fast. It's not really drying, it's cooling. It's just like if a candle drips onto your table, you know how fast that drip dries. It's the same thing. So I just need for it to cool just a minute, and then I can move forward. Now, this is the basics. So a porous substrate, a rigid substrate, but we can break that rule sometimes. If we have time, I'll tell you a little bit about that. We put one layer on and fuse it. We put another layer on and fuse it. And then after that, there are so many options that are open to you. Today, I'm just going to use, to begin with, I'm just going to use paint as if I were making just a painting with just paint. And that's how we're going to start. For many years, most of the paintings had red in it, so we'll start with red. This is a really bright red.
And Flo, it looks like you have tape on the sides.
I do have tape on the side. Thank you for mentioning that. It protects the sides, and then I don't have wax drips. Some people seem to be able to do a really good job of making it drip in an attractive way. I'm not sure that I do. So I tape mine on the sides. I also tape a little bit around the back because my fingers or my gloves get really messy. And then it looks more professional when I'm done if I keep the back clean as well. And so then I just pull this off when I finish, and it could be left plain. I usually rub a combination of walnut stain and polyurethane. It's all in one can, and just rub it on. There are other ways to finish it. Sometimes I paint it with black acrylic paint. And that reminds me, I mentioned that we must have a porous surface for the wax to stick. And acrylic is not porous. It's plastic, basically. And so the Encaustic will not stick to it. And of course, I learned that the hard way. So you want to avoid painting over anything that is acrylic based, and that includes gesso. If I wanted something with a white ground, I can, there are available panels that come with an encaustic gesso coating. You can also buy encaustic gesso, and it differs from regular gesso in that the particles are farther apart, and so it's more porous. And so if I wanted a white ground, I could paint with encaustic gesso first. Some people use things like plaster, like plaster patch or similar products. If I'm going to use several colors in the same painting, so I painted on some red and then I stopped and fused. That's usually a better process because then you don't forget. If you paint everything you're going to paint on there and then fuse, it's kind of likely that you might miss some, and so you don't want to do that. So I just fuse after every color. As a matter of fact, I think it's just a good plan to fuse after anything that you do. This one is black, but if you'll notice, it's pretty thin. This is one this pan was already prepared, I think, on one of our student encaustic play days. So it's pretty thin, and so it's more transparent. So this is kind of interesting combination, but that's okay. I'm just using colors that are on the palette.
Flo, can you explain what fusing it actually does and what happens when you don't?
It actually just remelts the wax a little bit, and it makes it adhere to the layer beneath.
Okay.
So it just sort of melts the two together.
So if you didn't fuse it, it wouldn't stick?
Correct. Now, encaustic lends itself well because it flows. You can, in the process of fusing it, you can make it swirly or whatever you want to do to it. So it lends itself well to abstract painting and big passages of color. But it doesn't have to be that way. As you saw in the Fay portraits, you can be very detailed. I have a couple of friends that do a really, really good job of very detailed paintings in caustic. I happen to be more of an abstract person, so I don't do that very often, but you can. Smaller brushes, you can take off areas. So that doesn't look very good, but that's kind of okay because as I had mentioned to you, we're just going to show you the process today and then I'll take it home and work on it. A colleague of mine and I taught a class called Endless Encaustic because we both feel that the possibilities are endless. When you get to this point and you've got just a basic ground, something to work with, then there are just so many, many, many things that you can do. You can rub dry pigment into it. This is just a gold, whoops. So I can rub dry pigment into it.
And what kind of pigment is that?
This is Pearl X powdered pigment that is here at the store. This is Pan Pastel that's available through special order here. And I was happy when they came out with metallic, because it sort of does the same thing without being the particles flying all around. So I like the solid better. So that is another possibility. This is a paint stick, also made by R&F, and it's a combination of pigment and linseed oil. So it's basically oil paint and a stick. And it comes like this, as I mentioned earlier. And this is, I think, black. After they're opened, after they're out of the package, then they develop a little skin. If they're in the air, they develop a little skin on the end. And so when you go to use it again, you can either cut off a little bit on the end with a razor blade or something like that, or just take a paper towel and rub it off until it's soft, till you get down to a soft part. Now, I tend to use this more toward the end of a painting, but I can do anything. You know, I can write my name or, you know, whatever I want to do with it. I tend to highlight areas, or if I do have a shape that I want to shadow, like if I wanted to shadow the edge of a line, and then I can, it moves really well over the wax, and then I can create a shadow. And of course, we don't want my name in the middle of this. So if I were using that in the process, and again, it would probably more be toward the end of the painting, and I would fuse it, not too much. Now, if I don't like what I just did, then I can scrape. That was still pretty warm, so it's scraping back to down to the early layers. But maybe that's what I would want to do. I save all these little scrapings, and I put it in one of my pans just to create a palette mud color, and it usually turns out to be a wonderful gray that I like then to use. A lot of times when I take these home, I'll paint a layer of gray over it and then paint it with white after I do whatever I do to it. There are ways to make shapes that don't require too much effort. I'll see if I can make something that looks like a flower for you. If it doesn't, we'll just laugh at it and keep moving on. But so there are a lot of things like that you can do. I could have also done some work on this panel before I started the wax, put some permanent markings on there before I applied wax, and then I would have something already to work with. This is a panel, and by the way, the wood panels that I'm using, I wasn't familiar with until they started carrying them here at Art Central, but this is my favorite one. It's really smooth. It's also lightweight. For a while I had to have my panels made, and they were just super heavy. And others that I ordered were really heavy. So this is one that I really like. This is one that's ready for whatever I decide happens next. And I applied some papers, just collage paper, with I think gel medium, and I glued them onto the sides as well as the front, and it makes a really nice ground. And if I did this, then I would be putting everything on in a really transparent way so that I could see. Yes?
We have a question. Can you burn the wax with the heat gun if you're not careful? If so, what happens?
Well, I can attest to that. It just won't look as good. You're not likely to catch it on fire. Colors will sort of discolor, and the wax can get kind of a more of a browny look if you were to heat it too much. Also, if you heat it on the griddle too much, it just turns a darker color. But you're not really likely to catch it on fire if that's the concern. So, by the way, this plastic that I took off of that panel, this is just a plastic tarp like painters use to put down, and I buy the long skinny rolls, kind of like a hall runner that you would put around the edge of a room or down the hall if you're painting it, and it doesn't stick to the painting, and so it wraps it up very nicely. The other thing you can use is freezer paper, but I paint such large paintings generally that the freezer paper is not big enough. All right, so I want to show you a few other things that you can do. This is heat transfer foil, and I could use a pen or any kind of stylus. And counter to your intuition, you have the shiny side up, and let's see what will work. So I can write, I can sign my name, I can put a little gold edging around the edge of my paintings to make it look like a frame. I don't usually frame my paintings. They look really nice in a float frame, but sometimes, depending on what it is, I can put just a little tiny edge of something around it so it just looks a little bit more finished. It depends on what it is. So we can also add papers. We can add, I often add thread or fabric of different sorts. Sorry, I'm going to have to reach my burlap. I don't have scissors with me, but if I had just a piece cut like this, I could dip it in the wax first, or I can just brush the wax on and make sure it's totally saturated in there. So I use a lot of this in my dimensional pieces now, and then I would fuse that.
Ask and you shall receive.
Oh, thank you. This is great. Who knows if this is what I would want on here, but it's just a way of building up texture. We'll add a little bit more wax to that and to all these strings that are over here. I'm trying to be careful to not have more than one layer of wax when I'm doing that, because it's going to appear better if you just do one layer and fuse it and then put another layer. There are many other things. Oil pastels are good markers for encaustic. India ink works well. Alcohol inks work well. India ink is more precise than an alcohol ink. Alcohol ink would be more if you want a splash of color somewhere. India ink, you can write or do some mark making. Same with the oil pastels. Oil pastels, you can make marks or you can blend. Say if I was working on something and I just wanted that little bit to be a little bit more yellow, I could take the yellow oil pastel and just highlight it a little bit so that it would pop out. Pardon? Oh, okay. For a good number of years, I used these Marvy markers, and it's Le Plume. It has to be the original Le Plume, and this one, I think it doesn't have much ink left in it, but it worked really well for making small marks or even having a color that I would blend. They are archival, but we're not sure that they're very light fast, and so I don't use them very much anymore. But if it's just for your own use, then I think you could probably do that. And I use the small end. The larger end, it's a different kind of tip, and it just doesn't work very well. I have to wait till the wax is cold. That didn't work very well. I think these are old because we aren't using them very much anymore. Stencils are good. Rubber stamps are good. Would be more likely to be using black or something like that, or gray for a stencil. Is kind of picking it up?
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, if I were in my studio, and if I had come home from a demo, then I probably would like pretty much coat it with the palette mud. How is our time?
We are at 1:42.
Okay. So we need to come to a close, but so I'll just do one little section of this and show you probably what I would do. Let it cool for just a second. While that's cooling, my favorite colors that I always have on my palette are phthalo turquoise, cad red medium, cad yellow medium, ivory black, and neutral white. Those are always on my palette. And so any of you who've seen my work, this is not as opaque as I would like for it to be. So at home I would add a little bit more paint to it. So I'm going to melt it a little bit more than I normally would, just to show you what I can do in the colors. And once it has several layers, if I want to, I can go back and scrape back down to some of the other colors. But if you're local and you've seen some of my paintings that are white, they almost start, maybe not with this many colors, but they often use some of these same materials to build up texture, and then they almost always have a neutral underpainting and then the neutral white on top. And I don't think it's out here, but there is one of these that's a gold, And I don't use that one quite the way I use some others, but I generally coat my whole painting very lightly with it and then rub it off with a paper towel, and it just gives a little sheen. It doesn't make it gold, really. It gives it a little sheen and makes it kind of warm. And then when you're all done with your encaustic painting, let it cool. Make sure it's cool to the touch, and then once it's really cool to the touch, like you don't feel any warmth at all, then you can buff it and make it have a nice shine. For the first few months after it's completed, you might need to buff it a few times, and then less after that. And to buff it, you would need like a soft t-shirt material. Some people use old pantyhose material, but we don't have much of that around anymore. Or Viva paper towel works really well. Or if it's a small painting, take off your rings and you can just buff with your hands. For my really big monstrous pieces, I use a car polisher. But I try not to, I can't hold it too long in one spot or it will melt the wax. I do have a handout for my demo. And if anyone is interested in receiving that, you can go to my website. And I think we're going to hold a card up there. My website is flobartell.com. And there's a place on there you can send me a message, and I will email you.
We have a question. Do you have an Instagram page?
Well, I do, but I can't even tell you what it is. It's FLORIDEA something. I forgot what, and I do have a few paintings on there, but I'm not very active on Instagram. I apologize.
Not a problem. What we'll do is we'll tag your Instagram in this live post once we post it, so anyone that wants to follow you can.
All right, but I'll be glad to email the handout. And then check out my website at flobartell.com, and you can see some of the large paintings that I'm talking about and some of the three-dimensional work that I like to do. And I appreciate you joining us, and again, I'm grateful to Art Central for all the support.
Thank you so much, Flo. Could you hold up your piece so I could get a close-up?
Well, we don't want to really look at it much because just a reminder, we were talking about process and not the end product today. But this will end up looking really nice at some point.
I love it. Thank you so much, Flo. We really appreciate you taking the time to do an encaustic demo for us today, and that concludes our live video. If there's any last-minute questions, I will answer them. Looks like we have Sally saying they should look at her website. Her paintings will give everyone such a great sense of what encaustic can look like. Thank you for that, Sally. Alrighty, say bye, Flo.
Bye.